A newlywed couple was spending their first Christmas together. Unfortunately, the festival was ruined as Uncle George came to stay. When they finally waved him off on Boxing Day, the husband turned to his young wife and said, "I'm sorry, dear. If I didn't love you as much as I do, I wouldn't have put up with your Uncle George for a minute." The wife looked horrified. "My Uncle George? I thought it was your Uncle George." Normally we tend to be a bit wary about whom we invite into our homes because they're private spaces, places where we can relax and be ourselves. Jesus' home was in Nazareth, but tonight's Gospel is keen to insist that he was born in Bethlehem. Luke explains this by referring to a Roman census. Census for tax purposes were not uncommon, although there are some issues about the historicity of the date and nature of this census. Luke makes this connection to Bethlehem because the town was the home of David, Israel's greatest king. Joseph, this gospel says, was descended from that royal family. So Luke tells us the story of Joseph, compelled to travel from Nazareth in the north, south to Bethlehem. He's accompanied on the journey with his heavenly pregnant wife Mary. We all know the story. Or do we? If you're wedded to the traditional nativity, please look away now. In most nativity plays, an important scene is where the innkeeper turns to Mary and Joseph and turns them away because there's full. There's no room in the inn. Actually, what Luke says is, she laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the Katalyma. The Greek Katalyma was traditionally translated as inn, hence the scene. However, I'm afraid that's not a good translation. The Gospel uses the same Greek word a second time when Jesus is about to celebrate the Last Supper. It reads like a good spy story. Jesus sends two of his disciples to follow a man carrying a water jug. When he arrives at his destination, the disciples will go to the owner of that house and say, "Where is the Katalyma, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" Here it's translated as guest room, a better translation. So returning to tonight's story, the most recent version of the NRSV and the Jerusalem Bible say, she laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the guest room. Goodbye inn, goodbye innkeeper. Most Palestinian houses would have a lower level where the animals were kept. This kept the beasts safe from theft. It also provided a cheap form of central heating on a cold night as the warmth of the animals would rise throughout the house. Above that would be the living quarters of the family. On the same level, many houses would have a special room for visitors. Hospitality was an important obligation in the Middle East. This was the Katalyma or guest room. This actually makes more sense. If Bethlehem is Joseph's hometown, he would have family there with whom they could stay. If not parents, then at least brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles. Luke is telling us at the time Joseph and Mary arrived, the special guest room is already full. They're not the only family members returning for the census. So as latecomers, they were relegated to the lower section where the animals slept, the stable. Luke is making an important point. Jesus was born not in the special guest room, rather he's born literally at the bottom of the pile, in a place where family and animals all shared together in one living space. No doubt that's why the shepherds felt comfortable in visiting the new baby. Rough, scruffy workers would not have been welcome in the nice, clean, upstairs living quarters. However, in the undercroft of the house, with the ox and donkey, they were in totally at home. Perhaps that's why Luke's angels give the shepherds a strong hint that it would be acceptable for them to visit. You'll find the child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger, an animal trough. It reminds me of my grandmother's terraced house. She had a front parlour. Here was to be found the best furniture. It was always kept clean and tidy. The room was not for living in. It was kept for respectable, important visitors. We messy kids were never allowed in Nana's front parlour. In contrast, the room at the back of the house was homely and comfortable. Here we could play and make a mess. The room was untidy but lived in. And yes, that is actually me. The message of Christmas is that God, in Christ, comes to us first in the ordinary bits of our lives. We want to reserve the best bits for God. We want to present him with the respectable part of our lives. However, the truth is that when he comes, he makes his home not in the Katalyma, the posh upstairs guest room, rather is to be found downstairs in the stable. He comes to the messy, untidy, rather grubby parts of our life. He doesn't come to the respectable front parlour. He comes to the back room where your messy kids were allowed and where shepherds would have felt comfortable. That's where the shepherds found the Lord 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem. And that's where we find him tonight. Amen.